Last week was supposed to be simple. For the first time ever, both the U.S. men's and women's hockey teams stood at the top of the podium at the same Winter Games. It happened in Milan. It happened under the brightest lights international sport can offer. And it united fans across the country in a way that rarely happens anymore. But within days, the conversation shifted. Not because of what happened on the ice, because of what was said off of it. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, congratulated the men's team after their dramatic overtime win against Canada. He called them within minutes. He invited them to attend the State of the Union. He praised their resilience. And then, in the middle of that celebration, he added something else. Something that many listeners immediately flagged as unnecessary. Something that reframed what should have been a shared national moment.
We have medals for you guys. And we have to, I must tell you, we're going to have to bring the women's team. You do know that.
Watch closely, not just what was said, but how it was framed. The men's team had just won gold. The moment was celebratory, spontaneous, triumphant. And in that context, the president's phrasing, "We're going to have to bring the women's team," sounded to many like an afterthought. Not a parallel honor, not a shared triumph, an obligation. That distinction is not trivial. It is perceptual. Because the women's team had also won gold. Not days earlier in a minor bracket, not in a secondary tournament. They won on the same Olympic stage, under the same pressure, against the same global scrutiny. And historically, the U.S. women's hockey program has been one of the most dominant forces in international competition since the sport was introduced to the Olympics in 1998. The men's victory was historic, yes. It ended a long drought. It reignited a rivalry narrative with Canada. It delivered an overtime thriller. But the women's program has sustained excellence for decades. So when the president appeared to treat their invitation as something he had to do, many heard something else. They heard hierarchy. They heard minimization. They heard imbalance in recognition. Now, was that the president's intention? That is not the structural question. The structural question is this: when a head of state speaks publicly about national champions, what responsibility comes with that platform? Because words, particularly from a president, do not exist in a vacuum. They set tone, they signal value, they frame narratives. And that is precisely why the captain of the U.S. women's team decided to respond. Her name is Hilary Knight. She is not just a player. She is one of the most decorated athletes in the history of women's hockey. She has competed at multiple Olympics. She has carried the program through cycles of growth and scrutiny. And when asked about the president's remark, she did not ignore it.
You're celebrating the magnificent accomplishments that you guys had over the Olympics, but you spoke about President Trump's comments about inviting you guys to the White House. Don't mean to detract from the celebration, but curious if you had any further comments, anything else you'd like to add about that?
No, I just thought the joke was distasteful and unfortunate. And I think, just the way women are represented, it's a great teaching point to really shine light on how women should be championed for their amazing feats. And now I have to sort of sit, and anybody has to sit in front of you and explain someone else's behavior. It's not my responsibility.
She identified the remark as distasteful and unfortunate. Then she widened the lens. This is a teaching point. That move matters, because instead of centering herself, she centered representation. She reframed the controversy into something larger than a single comment. How women are represented. How women should be championed. That is not a reaction rooted in ego. It is a reaction rooted in institutional equity. And then she added something else. Something subtle but important. It's not my responsibility to explain someone else's behavior. That line shifts accountability back where it belongs. It establishes a boundary. Athletes are not responsible for interpreting or repairing presidential messaging. They are responsible for competing, for winning, for representing their country, which they did, together. Now, if the story ended there, it might have remained a brief controversy, but it didn't. Because at the State of the Union, the president once again highlighted the men's team in front of the nation.
You're going to win bigger than ever, and to prove that point, here with us tonight is a group of winners who just made the entire nation proud. The men's gold medal Olympic hockey team. Come on in. They beat a fantastic Canadian team in overtime, as everybody saw, as did the American women, who will soon be coming to the White House.
But what is shifting the focus and shifting the narrative of this amazing accomplishment that we all did together. And granted, the men's and the women's team did it together, and that is super special. It's never been done in our program's history. It's something we're extremely proud about. But these women are amazing, and whatever is going on shouldn't never outshine or minimize their work and our success on the world stage. This was the best American women's hockey team, the best American team we've ever put together on a world stage when the lights have been the brightest ever. And so I think everybody felt that, going through the tournament. And I want to celebrate. I want people to be remembered for that. I want the legacy of this team to be remembered. And so that's what I'm trying to shift the narrative on and really focus on championing what we've done and what we've accomplished the last 2.5 weeks together.
That is leadership. Not just athletic leadership, cultural leadership. She acknowledged the issue, she addressed it directly, then she returned to the core achievement. Both teams made history, together. That unity became even more evident when members of the men's team later reflected on their reaction during the original phone call, including laughter that some viewers felt was uncomfortable in retrospect. One player publicly admitted they should have reacted differently. That admission did something important. It restored alignment. Because this was never a conflict between teams. It was about tone, about recognition, about whether national celebrations are distributed evenly. And this is where the conversation expands beyond a single remark. In sports, especially at the Olympic level, representation carries symbolic weight. Women's sports have historically fought for visibility, funding, media coverage, and equal recognition. Progress has been significant, but moments like this remind observers how quickly narratives can tilt. When a president speaks, the amplification is immediate. A casual phrase becomes a headline. A joke becomes a cultural debate. That is the nature of the office, and that is why words matter. Not because they change the scoreboard, but because they shape how the scoreboard is remembered. Now consider the structural contrast. The men's team ended a long gold medal drought. The women's team continued a tradition of excellence. One story was framed as resurgence. The other, perhaps unintentionally, was framed as expected. And when excellence becomes expected, it risks becoming under-celebrated. That dynamic is not unique to hockey. It appears across industries, across institutions, across representation debates, which is why Knight's response resonated beyond sports fans. She did not demand apology. She did not call for boycott. She identified the remark as a learning moment. That language lowers temperature while raising standards. It invites reflection rather than retaliation. And that may be the most powerful element of this entire episode. Because at the end of the day, both teams stood on the same podium. Both wore the same crest. Both heard the same anthem. The controversy did not erase the achievement, but it did introduce a question about how achievements are valued. Stripped of outrage, stripped of partisan framing, the core issue becomes this. When national leaders celebrate excellence, do they do so in a way that reinforces equality or hierarchy? That is not a sports question. It is a cultural one. And in this case, the Olympic captain chose not to let the moment pass silently. She chose clarity over comfort, focus over fury, and unity over division. Both teams made history in Milan. That fact remains untouched. But the conversation that followed reveals something equally important. Recognition is not just about medals. It is about message. And message, especially from the highest office in the country, carries weight far beyond the rink. Hillary Knight did not escalate the issue into a partisan battle. She did not frame it as a personal attack. She framed it as a representation issue, a respect issue, a language issue. That restraint is significant. Because moments like this often spiral into camps and counter-camps. Apology demands, defensive press briefings, social media warfare. That did not happen here. What happened instead was something quieter and arguably more powerful. A captain set a standard. She reminded the country that excellence, when achieved by women, should not be treated as supplemental to excellence achieved by men. She reinforced that shared victory means shared recognition. Not conditional recognition, not obligatory recognition, shared. And in doing so, she preserved the integrity of the moment. The medals remain gold, the history remains intact, the achievement remains unprecedented. But the conversation now includes something else. A reminder that leadership is not only tested in competition, it is tested in how we honor those who win.